Abba, Father, you are exalted above the highest heaven, and yet you have been down here among us in your Son, Jesus Christ. We worship you, but we thank you that we can know you and relate to you. We thank you that we can trust you, that you are utterly reliable. I pray now that you'll give us freshness of mind as we struggle on with this complex subject. May your Holy Spirit plant in our hearts and minds what each of us needs to remember from this day. And whatever the cost or consequence, may we remain faithful to you, the only true God, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. We're looking at the arguments for not using Allah when we talk about God of the Bible, even when we're talking to Muslims. We're looking at the same four arguments that have been used as the case for using Allah. But we're also seeing that the same arguments can be used the other way too. We've looked at two of the arguments so far. We've looked first at the etymological argument, that once the word for God has become a name, ceased to be a generic word for any God or many gods, and become a name of one God, then the situation has changed. And Allah is not just the Arabic word for God. It is now the name of the Muslim God. Of course, that led us to the second argument, the theological, the argument that there is so much in common between the two gods that we can use the same name. I've been showing you that that similarity is quite superficial, and that there are some profound differences between the two gods, very big differences that question whether we should use the name for both. We've seen how Islam, in a sense, speaks with a forked tongue, as they say, by claiming to be the fulfillment of the God of Abraham and Moses and Elijah and Jesus, and yet at the same time undermines that claim by questioning the biblical record. Let's just take this a little further. When we encounter Islam, we are encountering a non-Christian religion, a post-Christian religion, and an anti-Christian religion. The only world religion that has built into it a denial of the basic Christian truths and faith. It is therefore a very subtle distortion of the Christian religion. A deception, because it's a distortion, pretending to be compatible, but actually incompatible, claiming to be a consummation of the biblical revelation, and yet in fact becoming a contradiction of it, claiming to be a successor to the prophets in the Bible. It has become a substitute for the religion of those prophets, and therefore is far more dangerous than any other non-Christian religion. Half-truths are more deceptive and dangerous than outright lies. And that is why the devil rarely tells outright lies. He mixes enough truth in with the lie to deceive and to convince that he's telling the truth. From the Garden of Eden he's done that, when he said to Adam and Eve, "You shall be as gods and your eyes will be opened." That was only half true. And ever since, the devil is a master at taking things in the Bible and twisting them, often out of context, and making them mean something different, which is exactly what he did in the temptations of Jesus. Now let's go back for a moment to the man Don Richardson. Don Richardson is the one everybody has read and everybody quotes as having pleaded missiologically for finding common ground, building on that. And his two books, The Peace Child and eternity in their hearts enabled many ordinary Christians to see the point of this. The interesting thing is that he has now written a book about Islam and takes a totally opposite position. The book is called Secrets of the Quran. I have it at home. And his approach to Islam is totally different from his approach to all the pagan religions that he's worked among, where he concentrated on what was in common in words and ideas. But with the Quran, he has come to a totally negative position. And that is because he says you must take the Quran as a whole and not just in bits. I was saying that about any name of a person. You must take the person as a whole, whether you like all the bits or not. But he is saying you must take the Quran as a whole. It claims to be a whole revelation of God. And this is what he writes about it in his latest book. The Quran's good verses are like food an assassin adds to the poison to disguise a deadly taste. Now, it was almost a shock to read that, because it is so different from his normal missionary approach. But the point he is making is that here is a very dangerous mixture, a deceptive mixture which must be taken or rejected as a whole. Some of you who heard the recording I made or have read the book will know that to me one of the most important questions we need to ask is, where did the Quran come from? What was its source? What was its inspiration? And this is the question I have found that evangelical missionaries are unwilling or not wanting to discuss. But to me this is all important because it affects your whole outlook. Now, Don Richardson has come to the conclusion that the mixture is of demonic origin. And I have to say that that's my own conclusion as well. There are only 3 possible sources of religious revelation and experience. One is God, the second is man, and the third is the devil. Only 3. And therefore we have to ask, did God inspire the Quran? If he did, then he's contradicting himself. Either God inspired the Bible or the Quran, but not both. Cannot possibly be both. If you believe the Bible came from God, then you cannot believe the Quran did. No missionary could ever believe that God inspired the Quran. Most of them, I think, would say it was entirely from Muhammad's own mind and thinking that he put it together. And certainly there's quite a lot of evidence for that within the Quran, that it came from Muhammad's own thinking and experience. But he would claim that it came in those experiences in which he was in a semi-trance or stupor in the cave in the mountain where he meditated. And he claimed it came from Gabriel, the archangel. But I think most missionaries I've talked to seem to think that it all came out of Muhammad, one way or another. That he picked up truths indirectly from Jews and Christians, then mixed it up with his own ideas, and the result is the Quran. I believe there's more to it than that, because the mixture is so subtle and so deceptive and so dangerous that I see the hand of a supernatural agent in it. And of course, the devil is a master of disguise and would have no difficulty mimicking Gabriel, another archangel like himself. Your answer to where the inspiration and source lies will affect your thinking about the Quran as a whole. Now, at this point, I want to deal with an objection that some people make to the kind of line I'm taking. And it's this. If you are against the Quran of a monotheistic religion like Islam, Why are you not against Judaism, which is also monotheistic and believes in only one person called God? Why don't you dismiss their scriptures as well as the Quran? Well, there is a radical difference between the God of Islam and the God of Judaism, the God of the Quran and the God of the Old Testament. Our Bible makes it very clear that the God of Israel and the Father of Jesus are one and the same God. That you cannot say of the God of the Quran. The Old Testament and the New are both His revelation, inspired by Him. The Jewish and Christian concepts of God are at no point contradictory. They are complementary. The revelation of God through the Jews may be inadequate, but it's not incorrect. And therefore their scriptures are in our Bible. And they are as much inspired as the New Testament. There are Christians who don't read the Old Testament. There are Christians who say you don't need to, that we've got the New Testament that tells us about Jesus and the Holy Spirit. But I tell you this, people who don't study the Old Testament will not get to know God. If you want to know God, then you start with the Old Testament. That's what God Himself started with. He told people about Himself as God before He revealed the other two persons of the Trinity to us. The Old Testament is the foundation of the kind of God we know. It was a man called Marcion who centuries ago began to teach that the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament were different. It's the heresy we now call Marcionism, after his name. But it's astonishing how many people, even people in church, have got the idea that the God of the Old Testament was quite different, that He was a warmonger, that He was a cruel God, that He was a harsh God, a judgmental God, and that Jesus came to show us a different picture of God altogether. The best-selling author, Christian author today, whose books are selling by the million worldwide, I was invited to write a foreword to his latest book. And when I read it, I could not lend my name anywhere near. In the book he said, Jesus came to show us the mother love of God as distinct from the father love of God in the Old Testament. Now that's the old heresy of Marcionism, that they are two different gods. But I tell you now, though the God of the Quran is different from my God, the God of Israel is not. He is one and the same. Everything said about God in the Old Testament is true, and what is said in the New Testament adds to that, complements it, but never contradicts it. That is why Jesus commended the scriptures, which were for him were the Old Testament, he had no others. He commended them to his followers. He said, if you want to know about me, read them, for they bear witness to me. And it's a great discovery when a Christian realizes that the entire Old Testament is about Jesus as well. Jews are blind to that, yes, but it's there in their scriptures. I was invited once to preach a series of 5 talks in Lent, which I don't observe actually, but the Anglicans often invite an alien preacher for Lent. And so I was invited to give 5 talks in Lent in the Church of England. And the vicar said, I'd like you to talk about the cross to prepare us for Easter. And I said, that's fine, I'll do that. He said, could you give me 5 titles? He said, think about it. I said, I can tell you them right away. He said, what are they? I said, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And he said, no, I want you to talk about the cross. I said, I'm going to. But he said, I said, I'll talk about the cross in Genesis, the cross in Exodus, the cross in Leviticus, the cross in Numbers, the cross in Deuteronomy. He said, what are you going to talk about? I said, I'll talk about a father offering his beloved son, Abraham and Isaac, and how God stopped him at the crucial moment and gave him a ram with its head caught in thorns as a substitute, on the very mountain where centuries later another lamb was with his head in the thorns. Exodus, Passover lamb, whose blood was shed and the angel of death passed over. And in New Testament, Christ is our Passover. Leviticus, the scapegoat in chapter 16. They used to put all their sins on the poor scapegoat's head and push it out of the city. And it died in the wilderness, taking away the sins of the world. And there is a Jewish legend that in the year that Jesus died, the scapegoat found its way back into the city and brought all their sins back again. Because now that was not the way to get rid of them. Numbers, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Deuteronomy, whoever is hanged on a tree is under the curse of God. Picked up in Galatians by Paul. So he then began to see. The whole Old Testament is about Jesus. It's not just about God. You will get a new perspective on Jesus from the Old Testament. But there it is. So Judaism and Islam are in a totally different relationship to Christians. Can you see this? Muhammad hoped that the people of the book, which is his phrase for Jews and Christians, would add the Quran to their Bible. That is why in the beginning he was very friendly to Jews and Christians. Why he called himself both a prophet and an apostle, hoping that the Jews would accept him as a prophet and the Christians as an apostle. When they didn't, when they said, no, our scriptures are God's last word, they're not to be added to, he turned right against them. And towards the end of his revelation said, Jews and Christians are infidels heading for hell. So when people say, why are you against Islam as a monotheistic religion but not against Judaism as a monotheist? For the simple reason that the God of Judaism is our God, but the God of Islam is not. Therefore, Judaism in every sense of the word is a sister faith. And therefore Judaism is a stepping stone to the true God, but I believe Islam is a stumbling block. Now let's turn to the fourth argument and see about the practical implications of all this and how that argument figures. And the practical argument was that from the past, that the past has fixed this practice of calling the God of the Bible Allah, and we're not going to change it now, that it's too widespread, too deeply in the habits of thought and word to change. And in any case, if you try and change it, you're saying that everybody's been wrong. Quite a powerful argument, that practical argument. But let's turn from arguing from the past to looking at the present and the future, because that's where we are going to have to live. We're not living in the past. What has been done up to now may or may not be right to continue doing, because situations change, and we need to change both our words and our deeds to fit the present context and lay a foundation for the future. We should not lightly change long Christian habits just because they are habits. The past has good in it. And I'm afraid we live in a world where change is for change's sake. And the one thing that is certain not to change is that it will change. So have the circumstances in the Western world changed so significantly that we have to rethink this habit of calling the God of the Bible Allah. And I want to say that I believe they have. And that as we enter the 21st century, we are entering a new situation that makes that practice questionable. Let's look at one or two of the factors. The first factor is an increased mobility of population. People are emigrating, moving around the world in increasing numbers, so that, especially in urban areas, most cities are now multicultural and multi-religious. The big factor of pluralism is part of our experience today. 40 years ago, if a Gallup poll had been held, as the recent one was, and the British people were asked, do you believe in God? When they said yes, which was 3/4 of the population, everybody assumed they meant the Christian God. No longer does that apply. If you say, do you believe in God to the British people today, as a Gallup poll recently did, 2/3 of them said yes. But that is, in a sense, irrelevant information unless you ask a second question, which God do you believe in? Or even, what kind of God do you believe in? Because now there are many different gods in England. And whereas 40 years ago you could assume that when anybody said God, they meant the Christian Jewish one, now you can't take that for granted at all. Furthermore, missionary work of the last 200 years had a certain connotation which the very word missionary pointed to. The word missionary comes from the Latin verb mittere, which means to send. And that in turn came from a Greek word in the New Testament, the verb apostolo, from which we get our word apostle, which means to be sent. An apostle is a sent one. A missionary is a sent one. It's the same word as missile. A missionary was an intercontinental ballistic missile. They were sent from one country to another country. From a country where the main God was Christian to a country where the main God was someone else. That was the whole concept of being a missionary. You had to leave a Christian country and go to a pagan country and take the gospel with you. That concept of missionary work is now so irrelevant that the word missionary now is being deliberately dropped. The All Nations Missionary College, which I used to lecture at regularly and will be lecturing at next year, is now called the All Nations College. The Evangelical Missionary Alliance is now called Global Connections. All these bodies have realized we are now in a totally different situation. You don't send people from a Christian country to a pagan country with the gospel. They're on your doorstep. It's almost a two-way thing now. Sent to Muslims, you hardly need to be sent. They're living in your backyard, the next door. And so the very word missionary is deliberately being dropped today because of a totally changed situation. It's an out-of-date word. The very idea of sending from A to B is now irrelevant. Because now those pagan religions that were over there in another country are coming here. And missionary work is now in every different possible direction. You can be a mission to Muslims here or there or somewhere else, or to Hindus or to Buddhists. They're all around us now. It's no longer this concept of overseas to be a missionary. Do you follow me? Now all this is due to a mobility of population and the fact that Islam is now invading here. That's a totally different situation. When I was born, there was, I'm not even sure there was, one mosque in the whole of Britain. And it was just outside Woking, and you can see it from the train as you come from Woking to London on the right-hand side. And it was put up by an Englishman. Now there are 3,000 mosques. Then there were no more than a few hundred Muslims. Now there are over 2 million. And they're pouring in both legally and illegally. And their birth rate is far above ours. The whole situation is changing. Religions are now intermingling in every urban centre in the world. So the whole concept of taking the gospel somewhere else is almost obsolete. Well, now that's one of the factors that I believe puts us in a very different situation. We are now in a multi-faith, multi-religion, multicultural society. Unless you live in a few suburbs or rural areas, this is now life. The second factor is the spread of relativism, which I've mentioned in the book and on the recording. Relativism says all religions have some truth in them. All religions lead to the same goal. All are different ways of reaching God. None of them can claim to be the way. All a religion ought to claim is we are a way to God. We are a life to live. We are a truth. But to say the way, the truth, and the life is profoundly offensive. It is a claim to know the truth. And who does? Truth is to be found by dialogue, by each of us pooling our ignorance in one and finding out roughly what might be true. Or rather, what is true for you may not be true for me. What is true for a Muslim will not be true for a Christian. What is true for a Christian will not be true for a Muslim. Of course, this relativism kills all missionary endeavor. What is the point of taking your faith to anyone else? If theirs is as good as yours and as likely to reach God as yours, what is the point? And indeed it is considered bigotry to claim that you have more truth than anyone else. It's this relativism that lies behind the vilification of religion legislation that is now part of our legal code. Relativism says nobody has a right to tell anybody else what is true for them, only what is true for yourself. Now, Christianity makes an exclusive claim. Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but by him. In no other name is there salvation. And that is now regarded as bigotry. Fundamentalism will be the label that is often used and is regarded as an offense to modern society. Now, it is within that relativism that the pressure comes on all religious people to recognize other religions as equally valid and equally true. And this already is leading to joint acts of worship and prayer in which Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, and Jews can all join together, which the media are already calling the faith community, and which Prince Charles is already advocating regularly. Now that's the situation we find ourselves in the 21st century, and it's a new situation. And in my understanding, it becomes more important than ever before to distinguish between faiths for the sake of salvation. Because if you cut out of Christianity what makes it different from other religions, you cut out any hope of salvation. You cut out any gospel. It is the very exclusive nature of Christianity that makes it an inclusive religion. If it is the truth, then it must be for everybody. If it's a way to God, then it's only for those who choose that way. But if it's the way to God, then everybody not only has a right to hear about it, but we have a duty to tell them. So the crisis among Christians is, what do we really believe about religion? And what do we really believe about our religion? Or are we going to go along with the relativism and therefore the syncretism of our day, in which the world wants us to join together with every other religion? And many Christians are now falling for this emphasis on what we have in common with other religions. And of course, way above all the religions in England, way above them all, Islam and Christianity are by far the two biggest, and therefore the two main competitors. And the pressure from outside, from the world, is for the two to get together and become one. I have here a report of a dialogue between two Christian leaders and two Muslim leaders, held to determine how close the two religions were together. One was a Catholic, one was a Protestant on the Christian side. We must first establish the similarities. And they began to do this. The upshot of this whole thing, you can come and look at it afterwards, is that the Christians gave away the most distinctive things about Christianity. The need for an atoning death, they gave away. And so it goes on. Person of Christ, they were constantly giving away and saying, this isn't really essential to Christianity. And you're left with a Christianity that is simply being kind to everybody. Well, they've sold the gospel. Well, this is happening everywhere. Somebody was in this morning with us who's had to go back to a well-known college not far from here because he has lectures or some other commitment. And he wrote a little note to me that he goes back to a situation where in that college there is a society of Muslims 50 strong and a Christian union of 5 weak, not 5 strong, and that he is the only English Christian. And I tell you, you could multiply that situation nationwide. It is in this situation that syncretism and relativism have to be resisted by the true Christian. And that involves highlighting what we don't have in common with other religions. Now, in addition to all that, the big factor is the resurgence of Islam worldwide. Now the second largest and fastest growing religion in the world. And by 2050, on present trends, half the population of the world will be Muslim. It is growing 4 times faster than Christianity at this moment. Christianity is growing, and growing very fast in some parts of the world, but Islam is growing 4 times faster. And so here we are confronted in England now with 2 major religions. There's a program on the BBC called Sunday. I don't know if you listen on Sunday morning. Very informative, very worth listening to. But time and again I've said to my wife every Sunday morning after we've listened to it, did you notice that half the time was given to Islam and half to Christian? It began as a Christian news program. It is now 50% Muslim. And in fact, I can anticipate a day when it's moved from Sunday morning to Friday morning. And it's called Friday. The 4th channel, Channel 4 on your television, had so many programs on it recently in the last 12 months about Islam that journalists began to call it the voice of Islam. Now a new controller of Channel 4 has been appointed, and he is a Muslim. So one of our 4 channels now is in the hands of a Muslim controller. Now I'm just throwing all this out. The resurgence of Islam Whereas Islam was a relatively passive religion 100 years ago, and we could send missionaries from this country into a non-growing other religion country. Now we are faced with a totally different situation when Islam is the biggest challenge to Christianity, even in the Western world, throughout Europe and now in North America. That changes the situation and forces us to face a choice. Are we going to link up as sister faiths in a faith community? If we do, the cost will be that we lose the gospel. I'm sorry, but I'll spell that out in a moment. That will be the cost. And therefore, we will cease to be a saving religion and simply a practicing one. So why the resurgence? Well, there are a number of reasons why Islam is so now much more confident. And believe me, one of the reactions to my recorded message was the confidence that Muslims had in response, that what I predicted is going to happen. One of them, as you know, said, when asked about David Pawson's prediction, a leading Muslim in this country said, well, it won't happen for at least 5 and possibly 10 years. Isn't that comforting? I hope you feel reassured. But he simply took it for granted that Britain will be Muslim. And that's it. Now, what has given them this confidence? One is the end of European colonialism of the Middle East. Because the Middle East was parceled out between European powers, Britain, France, and so on. And they were colonies. World War I began to give them political independence and autonomy in the Middle East, the heartland of Islam. And now nationalism has risen very powerfully in the Middle East, Arab nationalism, Muslim nationalism. The other thing, of course, has been money. Black gold underneath the Arabian deserts. Oil has provided petrodollars that now gives them power worldwide. Most of the mosques you see in Britain have been built with Arab money. Their money is pouring into universities to build Islamic centers in every place of education. And it's all being financed by oil revenue. So given the political independence and the financial power, you begin to understand why they are on a surge of confident expansion everywhere. Now that's a new factor. From the days when the first missionaries were sent to Muslim countries, now we are facing a resurgent, competitive, challenging religion that is bursting at the seams. But there are other practical factors. In fact, I'm going to add a 5th argument on this side. You remember I said 4 arguments for using Allah: etymological, theological, missiological and practical. I've been through the same 4 arguments, but seen them in a different light. I want now to add a 5th argument, and it is the eschatological argument. There's another confusing word for you. I think most of you may be familiar with it. It means the study of the end times, or the study of the last days. The Greek word eschaton means end. And eschatology is the study of the winding up of history. How will history end? How will it all be brought together? And there is an eschatological argument I now want to bring in, and it's this. We know from the New Testament how history is going to end. We're the only people who know. That's amazing, isn't it, that we don't tell other people what we know. But we're the only people in the world who know how it's all going to finish up. And as part of that end time, there is going to be a time of big trouble, or great tribulation. It will be brief. God will keep it brief, or no one will survive, but we're heading for big trouble. Furthermore, as part of that big trouble, there will be an unholy trinity controlling our world. Instead of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, there will be the devil, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. An unholy trinity matching exactly the Holy Trinity, but a hellish substitute for it. And the devil will have two human beings who are his puppets, who will be the final controllers of history before Jesus gets back. There is the Antichrist, who, by the way, does not mean against Christ. Anti means instead of. And he will offer peace and security to a world torn apart. And he will produce it for them. As Hitler brought many good things in his first years, dealt with unemployment and inflation, built the Autobahn, the motorways, did a lot of good things, as did Nero. But it seems that these dictators get corrupted by their own power and finish up doing terrible things to people. Antichrist in his first few years will bring peace and security to the Middle East and to the whole world. The world will become one political system, one world government. But alongside that, the false prophet will also bring one world religion. And I believe the New Testament teaches us clearly that we are heading towards a one world religion. And there will be two groups of people who will not be caught up in it, provided they remain faithful to their God, Jews and Christians. Now then, if we believe that the end times are much nearer than they used to be, and if the signs are beginning to show that we are heading up to that climax that the New Testament describes, then Christians will be more than wary of being caught up in a united world religion. You with me? That's an eschatological argument which I add to the others, that I believe Christians will resist, in the name of Jesus, a syncretism of world religions, a coming together in one faith, community of the different faiths. So that's my final argument against using Allah, because I believe that's now a very real, confusing step towards a union between the two faiths. The pressures are very, very strong. Now then, as I come to an end of my second subject, which is the case against using Allah, I want to add two little comments in conclusion to that side of the argument. Two opinions that I haven't mentioned yet. First of all, Muslim opinion. What do they think about Christians using the name of their God in evangelism? Strange that people don't often ask that question. And the answer is they are very angry about it. I told you that Jim Packer's book, Knowing God, is being translated and published in a non-Arabic speaking but Muslim country under the title Knowing Allah. But this is being very strongly resisted by the Muslim authorities in that country. They do not want the name of their God used on the lips of infidels. And we are infidels. An infidel is someone who is not a Muslim. And they are very angry at Christians using the name Allah in missions. They are jealous for the name of their God. That's one little codicil to the argument that I thought you might be interested in and ought to think about. They find it offensive and even blasphemous. Why then should Christians persist in using it? Does it not raise an unnecessary offense in seeking to win them for the gospel? The other opinion that I've never heard mentioned is, what does God feel about being called Allah? Strange that nobody ever asked that. He's the one most affected. Does he have any feelings about it? Well, I will tell you, I have no prophetic word from him to that effect, but I approach it through the Bible when I don't have a direct word and say, is there anything there that would give us a clue? He has given himself many names in the Bible, far more than Allah's 99. But he never called himself Allah. So how does he feel about using the name of another God for himself? Well, there are two verses that came immediately to mind. One is in Exodus, where he sums up, after giving the 10 Commandments to Israel, he says this: "Be careful to do everything I have said to you. Do not invoke the names of other gods. Do not let them be heard on your lips." And one modern translation translates that, "Do not even mention their names." And the same thing appears in Deuteronomy as well, where God orders Israel, when they get into the land and find themselves confronted with other gods, he orders them, wipe out their names. Of his own name, he is very jealous. He says, don't take my name in vain. Be careful how you use my name. But don't even mention the names of any other god. Well, now, does that give us a clue as to how God may feel about this? Well, that brings us to my third subject for today. What is the alternative? Especially when we are trying to win Muslims for Christ, is there an alternative to calling God Allah? Or are we shut up to that because, as some missionaries claim, it is the only word for God? So here's my third subject, and we're getting on very well for time. You really might get out of school early, but would you like a break now? Because you've been doing some hard thinking. One or two heads nodding. Would you like a leg stretch anyway? Yes, all right, let's just stand up and move around and sit down again. And then we'll start on the third and fourth.